I want to talk about writings of St.John Cassian. Some of his writings are in the Philokalia. As you know, the Philokalia is a collection of writings by Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain, and other authors. But he's known as the father of the West, but in fact he wasn't born in the West. He was born in what's called Roman Scythia, which is actually Dobrogea. Do you know that? Yes. Dobrogea is a region that includes southeast Romania. This is by modern borders. Southeast Romania, which would be Constanta, and northeastern Bulgaria down to Varna. So that area is called Dobrogea or Dobrogea. Dobrogea, okay. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. That's where he came from in 360, so pretty early. And he and his friend, actually, who was at school with him, a school friend, and they were in the army together, which I assume was Byzantine army, both became monks. And they went off to Bethlehem, where they entered a monastery there. And then from there, this is very brief biography, but we need to have the background, it's important. Then they went to Egypt to visit the Desert Fathers to find out about desert spirituality. Now, St. John was fluent in Greek and Latin. So this is a connection why he eventually went to Marseille, having collected the writings, and I've got some here. He then went to Marseille and he founded 2 monasteries, one for men and one for women. And eventually he went into Gaul, modern France, and that's where he reposed. But he wrote all his works in Latin because he wrote for Western Christians. Orthodox Western Christians, that is. And on one of his visits with Gerasimos, that was his friend, monk Gerasimos. I don't know whether he had a rank or anything. But anyway, they went to Sketis, which was a famous part of the desert, and they went to see Abba Moses. If you remember, Abba Moses was the robber, and converted robber. He was Nubian, he's black. They went to see him, and I was delighted to find that he actually was quite vociferous. He had lots to say. You don't know that normally. He's very quiet. But in fact, they went to talk to him and asked him, you know, what do we do? How do we live a proper spiritual life? Now, they were asking that in reference to monasticism, because they're both monks. And he said, and I'll start with this quote, this is Abba Moses, said, all virtues and pursuits, in other words, what we do, have a certain immediate purpose, an immediate purpose. Those who look to their purposes will reach their ultimate goal. This is from Abba Moses, and then he said, for example, take a farmer. You know, everybody should have an immediate purpose and an ultimate purpose. For a farmer, the immediate purpose is to prepare the land. You dig it, you remove the weeds, you fertilize it. What's the ultimate purpose?
Souls.
Food. For the farmer.
I think it's
Harvest.
the ultimate purpose of everyone.
Harvest, yeah, food.
Yeah.
Food. Here's just using a secular example. I haven't got to that one yet. Hang on. You're reading my notes. So, you know, and he said, well, you're monks, so what's your immediate purpose and what's your immediate ultimate goal? Well, they couldn't think of immediate purpose, because that's why we're here asking you. And we know what the ultimate goal is. It's the kingdom of heaven. He said, correct. But you have to have an immediate purpose. And he said, it is purity of heart. Now, change monk to Christian. That's us. So we don't have to be monks to answer this question. We have to have purity of heart. And I don't want to explain what that is, because you know what that is. But in other words, you have to pursue, your immediate purpose is pursue the spiritual life, which is what we're all trying to do, okay? But in some circumstances, you have to not become so worldly. We have to renounce worldly occupations. But it doesn't mean you have to give up your job. It's not like that. It's just that some of the attractions are not appropriate. And you can't lay down rules for it, okay? Each person is different. There's certain things you have to give up when you become orthodox, or when you take a spiritual life. You're already orthodox, but you now become serious. There's certain things you can't do anymore. It's not because they are bad, but they don't help. They don't help our purpose. They're in the way. I mean, we know about fasting, and maybe some of us didn't fast before we really took our faith seriously. Okay, there's not a judgment, it's fact. So we've realised that fasting is important, and to keep the churches fast. St. Seraphim says, if you don't keep the Wednesday and Friday fast, you're not a Christian. That's something to consider. The basis to obtain purity of heart is love. We can't do anything in the spiritual life if we don't have love for our neighbour. Otherwise it becomes a sort of Pharisaical religion. Got a quote here from, yes, when we're pursuing the immediate purpose, obviously we stumble and we make mistakes, and even we give up. This is a part of our struggle. One day we're up on it and feeling pious and doing what we're doing, the next day we're not. And some days we've lost it. This is a part of the struggle. All of us are struggling, but we still have the immediate purpose. Even if we haven't obtained it yet, we have to have that in mind. And here's a quote here. Abba Moses quotes from St. Paul to the Philippians. And here's a quote, which you probably know anyway. Forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies in front, I pursue my purpose, aiming at the prize of the high calling of God. Okay, this is very verbal. But in other words, we have to forget, if we lose the zeal that we should have for our spiritual life, we have to go back and get it again. But we can't go back. We're not going back, because we're only going to go forward. If we stop and slide back, we're still going to go forward. This is, as St. Paul says, because we have the high price of our calling. Because God has called us to be like Him. So we can't go back. Once we've heard the call, however weak we are, we still have to go forward. And this is why this is a struggle. This is why we have confession, which helps. Holy Communion. In a situation, in the current political situation that we're all in at the moment, we can only go forward. You mustn't give up. You mustn't, say, "Oh, I can't possibly cope." No, we can. Well, sometimes individually we can't cope, but we can as community. And we're never alone, because we are part of the church, even if we don't see it or feel it physically. He says to the monks, he says, well, another way, one of the problems for a monk, okay, and I think this applies to us as well, is that to acquire purity of heart, sometimes we have to give up our wealth. And he says, he's talking more like monks in the practical sense, that they give up their wealth and they go into the monastery and they don't have any possessions. But when they get into the monastery, they get angry over a fork or toothbrush. So it's nothing to do with great wealth and gold or whatever you wear, beautiful clothes and things. It's to do with yourself, isn't it, inside? And those temptations can come on a rather mundane level, but they're very serious. In Corinthians, St. Paul says, though I give my body to be burned and have no love, it profits me nothing. And Abba Moses says, and I quote here, to look upon God and to think of Him at all times is impossible, why we live according to the flesh and are enslaved by our weaknesses. So we can't possibly think about God. How do we think about God all the time? On the practical level, it's the Jesus prayer. Yeah, even if it's mechanical, it's. But Abba Moses is actually, he says, well, at the beginning it's very difficult to be able to concentrate on God all the time because you're doing other things. He says, but look at nature. Look at the beauty of the creation. Look at the beauty of the creatures that God has created. Think about God's love for us, His incarnation. the suffering on the cross. These are the things that we can think about during the day. Everybody can do that. And it gives us, we feel we have gratitude. All these things lead towards purity of heart, the remembrance of God. And somebody might say to me, well, I prayed in the morning, but I forgot by lunchtime, I forgot all about it. Well, did you ever look out the window? The beauty, especially this time of year, for Indian side, it's beautiful. The changing the trees and all this is these things we say, glory to God. This is important. This is all a part of how we live. So there are many ways to contemplate God. This is what Abba Moses is saying. His love, his incarnation, and suffering for our sins. And of course we know that God is known also through hesychasm. Now I'm not saying that we can practice hesychasm. It's on a special level. But we can say the Jesus prayer as much as possible while we're driving in particular. Now I think it's important that things that you do during the day are related to the prayer. And it can be from sweeping the house, doing dishes, any physical job is always conducive to prayer. Intellectual is obviously more difficult. For me today, intellectual was actually preparing the talk. So that's prayer. Reading the Philokalia and preparing for a talk, this is part of prayer. I'm thinking about God, I'm not thinking about something else. And this has got to become a habit, is who we are, what we do. This is nothing sort of extra or something extraordinary, it's just that's just who we are. Get up in the morning, we cross ourselves, we say glory to God. As soon as we get up, bleary-eyed, but we do that, and it becomes a habit. Father Sophronia said, always cross yourself when you leave the house. And he said, I used to find little verses from Psalms which would help, like, open unto me the door of loving time, open unto me the door of salvation, as you go through the door. Every little trigger pointers, they're there all the time for us to use, and to bring us to concentrate on the immediate purpose, so that we may reach the ultimate goal. Now, the biggest problem, of course, is thoughts. How do we deal with thoughts? It's impossible for the mind not to be troubled by thoughts. We cannot stop the thoughts, but we have the power to expel them. We see something we don't like and we immediately want to pass a judgment, but we can say, Lord, have mercy. And so we not let that thought become a judgment and a grow. This, especially with this political situation, church politics, very much so, this is something we've got to avoid. If we feel upset by it, then that means that we need to pray about it. We need to go to the icon corner or wherever you are, driving your car, and start saying the Jesus prayer. Once you're engaged in those thoughts, then you're courting them. And there's no way that we can have even move towards purity of heart. So we can't. How do we deal with thoughts? It's impossible for the mind not to be troubled. But it is within our power to expel them. And Abba Moses says, think of the things to come. If you're feeling downhearted and lack of faith, what is to come? What is the ultimate goal? Heaven? Or is the ultimate goal Gehenna? No, I think it's important to dwell on death. It's important. I don't mean that in a morbid sense, but the people that we know and love have passed on already. Where are they? What do they do in this earth that's of any value? I'm not being negating people. I'm just saying that it's all gone. And I think there's recently Paul Allen, billionaire, did a lot of work for charity. He's not here anymore. Gone. Paul Allen, he died 2 days ago. Yeah, died of cancer. Yeah. All gone. Because in the next life, where are we going to go? Up or down? That's one of the fathers is like a ladder. One ladder leads up, the other one leads down. Which one are you going to step onto? this is also how we have purity of heart. It leads towards our purpose, because we think, well, what am I doing in this life? Now, that's not negative in the sense of what am I doing, you know, in that sense, but it's that we realise this is only temporary. But we can't feel it's temporary because we're in it. And we have ambition, and we have expectations. And why not? As long as they are God-oriented towards heaven, then why not? And he says, Abba Moses says, our thoughts are like a watermill. You know the watermill, it turns all the time, long as the water's when it's turning. I mean, it's modern technology, you can switch it off, but basically in the old days it just turned. And it was up to the miller what he put, you know, through the mill, whether it was wheat or chaff, tares. And that's the same with thoughts. We cannot stop the thoughts because it's like a watermill. Impossible. They're going at the moment, all the time. But we can decide which ones we will accept and the ones that we will expel. That is our freedom, and we do have that power. And of course we're guided by God's grace. Now this comes down to basically a virtue, discrimination, discernment. Because whatever we do, if we don't have discernment or discrimination, we will make mistakes. A prime example is Saul in the book of Samuel. Now I don't remember the details behind it, but I know that Samuel told Saul that he was not to make a sacrifice to God in the battle against the Midianites. Wasn't allowed to. He said, don't do it. But he panicked and he offered a sacrifice to God. You know, not to demons or something. He sacrificed to God, and God punished him, and he lost his kingdom. It was because he lacked discrimination. He disobeyed the prophet. This also applies to obedience, of course. I'm coming round to that. Here's an example from the Old Testament, and I have others here. Sorry, excuse me. There was a desert father called Hiram, Abba Hiram. He spent 50 years as a hermit in his cell, and he was known for fasting and long prayer and everything. But after 50 years, he fell. Not only did he fell out of monasticism into vices and impurity. The reason he fell is because he saw an angel, which was a demon, and he believed what the angel told him, and said, "You're doing a wonderful job." Basically, 50 years asceticism. There's nobody like you in the desert. Maybe St. Anthony is an exception, but you are wonderful. He believed it. How can he believe it after all those years of asceticism? But he did. And yes, thank you. What's a mess? The angel told him to throw himself into a well. He said, because you cannot be, with all the virtues you have, you cannot be hurt, bodily injured. So, one night he got, he just threw himself into the well. Well. They found him, the fathers found him, they dragged him out, he was half dead. In fact, he only lived for 3 days and then he died. As an extreme example of lack of discrimination, lack of discernment. But the fathers felt sorry for him because he spent all these years striving to do what was right, but was caught out at the end by a demon. And so they actually commemorated him with the departed so that he would not be labelled with suicides because he'd been attacked by demons. Okay, I have similar situation in that I commemorate a couple of people who was technically in suicide, but in fact because they were deranged and probably on drugs, I don't think they were responsible. I err on the side of them. I think, so I'm just giving an example. Can be done. And Abba Moses says, how do we acquire discrimination? How do we know it's genuine discrimination? And he says the answer True discrimination comes to us only as a result of true humility. It always comes down to humility. And humility is brought about by obedience. We can be obedient to our spiritual father, we can be obedient to our spouse, we can be obedient to a friend if it's, good thoughts. In other words, one should always test things with other people. It's very important. And not this danger of being on our own, because I tell you, when we're on our own isolated, then the demons will definitely move in. But of course they move in a very subtle way, as angels, and don't come as demons in their true form. And he says that through humility we need confession. And that confession, now this is a debatable point actually, especially in a parish, and for me as a parish priest, is that confession is not confessing what I did, but what I think. Now usually that's, from what I've read and what I've understood, that should only happen if you go into a monastery to a spiritual father, living under that sort of obedience, that you have to reveal your thoughts. I don't understand that, because I think in confession you say both, don't you? In my experience, although it's something separate. But I think it's because there's a danger of somebody being in authority but doesn't really have any experience. And so if you reveal your thoughts, and I'll give you an example. Here's another example here, exactly in the desert. There was a father, and he was very old, and white hair, white beard, and a disciple went to him and revealed to him a sin of unchastity, some sexual sin. The father actually was angry when he heard the confession. And he said, well, this is disgraceful. And you call yourself a monk, and you have those thoughts, not you doing something. And he chucked him out. So the brother thought, well, that's the end of my monastic life, just started. And so he's out on the road. Well, fortunately he meets Apollo, who's famous Abba. He says, what's happened? He said, well, I have these terrible thoughts, and my elder has banned me from being a monk. Oh, he said, well, this is ridiculous. No, he said, no, you go back to your cell. I will vouch for you. You go back to your cell, you just carry on, and you'll be all right. But what did this Apollo do? He went to the cell of the elder, and he stood outside. In fact, he made a prostration on the ground. He prayed to God. He says, God, please let this elder have a little taste of the battle. And the elder was very disturbed, because some demon with arrows came and started firing at him, and he didn't know what to do. He'd never experienced any sexual thoughts. Didn't know what to do. So what did he do? He thought, well, I after all these years, I'm going to leave. I have to go back to the world. And Apollo said to him, met him, of course, and said, what are you doing? He said, well, I can't live. He says, you have got to learn to have sympathy for others, and that's why you're being attacked. But it will go away. And he says, you have never been attacked in your spiritual life because you weren't worth it. Worth it. Demons didn't bother with you. I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? Terrible judgment. Another example of discernment I have here is, Abba Serapion. Yes, he's a famous Abba as well. He had a passion, well, what do you call it? An addiction to stealing. And he would steal rusks. You know what rusks are? Dried bread. I mean, and he would, at the end of the meal, nobody looking, he would put them in his pocket, and then he would eat them later. And he just did this for a long time, and eventually he goes to confession. He thinks, well, I better, he's embarrassed and shamed to admit this, because he's obviously a very good monk in every other respect, but he's got this habit that to take rusks and eat them. And he says it to his spiritual father, who's a spiritual father, and he says, oh yes, he said, well, that's, don't worry about that. He says, you've confessed it, you have revealed the demon of gluttony. And he said, at that moment, this is Serapion talking, he said, in my chest became very hot, and a sort of fire came out of it. And there was a terrible stench in the room as the demon was expelled. He's speaking from his own experience, having this passion, this habit of stealing rust. Well, after that he didn't do it again. But here's an example of an elder who had discernment. The art of arts needs a teacher who can't be self-taught. In other words, the spiritual life cannot be self-taught. This is the problem for all of us. I mean, I don't know, but for me, coming to orthodoxy, where do you get it from? You read it, you have to get it from books. And some of the fathers say that. I think Theophan says if you can't have a spiritual father, whatever difficulty is in, rely on the books, pray, but you have to have humility. Because it's so dangerous that when you set up your own spiritual, regime, it's based on pride. And so we need the discipline, and we need the discipline of having a spiritual father. That doesn't mean me necessarily. Now, here's an example of what happens if you don't have a spiritual father. Here's an example of two brothers who were in the desert. This is recorded by St. John, that they went into a desert where there was nobody around at all, and nothing there. I mean, and one of them became very ill, and eventually they fainted, and they were discovered by a tribe of nomads who were very fierce, and didn't kill them, which they would normally, but they felt sorry for them, so they gave them some water. Well, one brother drank water, the other one said, no, I can't. I'm fasting, this is not what I do. And so he died. This is excessive. Without guidance, without discrimination. It is a sin to fast too much. In fact, fasting too much is the same as gluttony. Not sleeping. I don't think that applies to any of us here, but it's sleeping is as bad as sleeping too much. Extreme. We've got to have a balance, and we can only have a balance if we have guidance. So you haven't got a priest or anybody around. How do you do? What do? You go to your friend and say, look, I want to do this. You're telling somebody else, and so God will guide you. St. Paul, I have an example here of the discernment. St. Paul, when he's converted on the road to Damascus, he's sent by God to Ananias. He doesn't do it. He's full of grace, he's received the Holy Spirit, but he goes to Ananias to learn what to do, and that is his obedience. Again, when he went to Jerusalem to see Peter and Paul, he actually went to ask their advice. Though he was equal spiritually, but he was obedient to them. And so this is a prime example of that. And here's a quote from Abba Moses says, who can be so proud and boastful as to be satisfied with his own judgment and opinion?